Welcome to the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrian Campbell, where we talk about real life, challenge assumptions, and explore different ways of being in the world. This week, I have Dr. Cacky Mellor joining me once again as co-host to discuss exactly what the term somatics means and how it shows up in our daily lives. I hope you enjoy. All right, so welcome to episode 22 of the Energetic Psyche. This is a weekly podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrian Campbell. This week, I have Dr. Cacky Mellor joining me again as a co-host to discuss exactly what the term somatics means and how it shows up in our daily lives. So a little bit about Dr. Cacky. She's a visiting professor at Lesley University's Mental Health and Wellbeing Department and has a remote somatic private practice called Somatic Reclamation. She has spent the past 15 plus years studying the power of words on the body, mind, soul, and community, and I'm so glad to have her here with me for this episode. So welcome again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I also just noticed this is episode 22, which is one of my very favorite numbers. So this feels very auspicious to talk about one of my very favorite topics.
Yes. I know. And, I shortened your bio because this is the third time now you've been on the show, and you will be a few more times because you're co-hosting with me moving forward on several different topics, which is so appreciated. But I think it's also important to point out that you have certifications in somatic experiencing. Can you tell us a little bit about your education and your background in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I went to the same doctoral program at Pacifica Graduate Institute, where we studied depth psychology with an emphasis in Somatic Studies. And my draw to that program really started when I was studying holistic psychology in undergrad at Lesley University. And I got so inspired by reconnecting with my body, by finding that there is value and meaning and potential in really understanding the relationship with my body and honoring the wisdom and innate intelligence that's available to all of us through our body. And that deepened during my time studying at Pacifica. And when I was working on developing my dissertation research, I was working with Keisha Bikes. And she was like, your work sounds an awful lot like somatic experiencing. Like, have you ever looked at Peter Levine's work? And I was like, yeah, I've heard that name, but I don't think I've read any of his work. She's like, I think you need to read all of his books and go and do at least the first year of the somatic experiencing training as part of preparing to go out into the field and do your research. And I was like, sounds awesome. I am game. So I did
hang on. Didn't we have some of his books as part of our curriculum at Pacifica?
We did in the trauma class, I believe.
Okay, maybe I just ended up with his stuff all on my own, because I have I think 3 of his books on my shelf. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He has a ton. Yeah. And so I started in the Somatic Experiencing Training Program. And at first it was, the first training was a bit of a shocking experience for me, I'll be honest, because I was like, okay, I'm going to dive in. I've been studying. I'm ready. Let's apply these techniques. Let's learn. Let's dive in. It's a very experiential and hands-on training program. There's a lot of peer-to-peer work that you do. And I was expecting to really dive into that day one. And the whole first day was so slow and focused on orienting, and I can't even tell you how slowly it felt like the facilitator was speaking. And I just on the lunch break was tearing my hair out, I was like, what did I get myself into? Like,
and I consider you to be a much more like slow and intentional human. So I feel like I would probably lose my mind, but
yeah. And to be fair, it's very different with different facilitators, but this was my first facilitator that I studied with. And it was also this major contrast because I was doing the training in New York City and then coming into this super slow, intentional, methodical. We spent the entire first day just orienting to what to expect for the training and for the modules.
Oh my goodness.
And I was losing my mind. I was so like amped up and ready to go. And what I learned over the course of the training program is just how dysregulated my nervous system was when I first started. And that's what I was bumping up against, was the lead facilitator inviting students and inviting everyone's nervous system to come to this place of calm, of being in the present moment, of orienting to the here and now. And my system was going 100 miles a minute. Like, I'm ready for day 4 now. Like, let's go.
You were in the middle of a doctoral program too. So, well, not the middle. You were closer to the end, right?
Yeah, I was in the halfway through year 3 of classes, I think.
So we're going to have a whole episode talking about SE, I think in September. So you went through, so this was your first one and Keisha said, hey, go check it out. And so at this point, I know you're a master practitioner, right? So you obviously kept going.
Yeah. So I went through the entire Somatic Experiencing training program. I ended up working with several different lead facilitators and really, really deeply connecting with Allison Helquist, who is one of the lead facilitators for Somatic Experiencing, who brings in a lot of attachment work. And I've done a lot of personal and professional study with her since then. And throughout my time at Pacifica as well, Dr. Ray Johnson had created a relationship with ISMETA, the International Somatic Movement Therapist and Educator Association, so that certain courses that we took as part of the training could count towards the hours for professional accreditation with ISMETA, where you could do a portfolio rather than going through one of their like linear training programs that led to accreditation. You could put together, I've done this training, I've done these courses at Pacifica, I've done this, and write a narrative explaining how each of these things meets the specific core criteria for ISMETA. And I did that approach where I used all of my Pacifica courses that were allowed to be included, plus the Somatic Experiencing training that I did, plus many, many, many other trainings in somatics that I had done over the years, and was at first the 500-hour professional membership, and since then they've added 2 additional levels of training. And just earlier this year, I was approved at the Master Somatic Movement Therapist and Educator level, which is 1,000 hours of professional training.
Awesome. Perfect. See, and so I wanted to explain all that because what we're talking about here today specifically is kind of challenging some of the stuff that's out there. And so I think it's really important that anyone that's listening or watching like understands, especially your background. Like I have like a sprinkle of somatics compared to you, like a sprinkle. But this is something that we talked a lot about and wanted to address, right? And so like I said, I think it's important that people understand where the information is coming from, because too often we pick stuff up on the internet and we just like take it as gospel. And I want people to question and be like, yeah, but who are you to say blah, 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 or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. And somatics has really, the term somatics has been taken out of context and appropriated and turned into this pop psych buzzword where different people are using it as a label to mean whatever they want it to mean. And it's really important that folks who are consumers, who are looking for somatic work, are really discerning and clear about what they're looking for, what they're expecting, the type of training that the practitioner that they're wanting to work with has done, the ethics of it. There's so many pieces that's really important for informed consent that discuss these things.
Yeah, I mean, and it just reminds me of honestly like quite a few episodes that I've had now where it's just, I really just want people to be informed.
Yeah.
And to understand that they have like self-agency and, to be frank, the responsibility to themselves to do the work to find the right person. And, I think it's hard because we're all so busy these days that like we hear something and we're like, oh, I want to try that. Maybe that'll help me. Or, oh, I want to try that. Maybe that'll help me. But the word somatic has just been tacked onto so much stuff that, and I hate seeing people manipulated. And that's what I feel like a lot, especially when I see it like all over like Instagram and social media and all this marketing stuff where it's like, come to this somatic, whatever, name something course. And it's like, it's probably like literally the exact same course that it was last year, but you just tagged somatic on it now. And it's like $23.99, blah, 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 blah. It's just I care about people, and it's like I want you to get like not just your money's worth, but like your time's worth. And if you're gonna do something that's supposedly somatic, like it's so powerful and like such a big deal and so impactful. And so like I also think about people going through these somatic courses and or working with people who work in somatics when they don't really. And they're like, well, that didn't do anything for me. Somatics is stupid or somatics doesn't work. And it's just like, but you didn't go to the right thing,
Right. Or even worse, they're harmed because there's not a container and there's not the reverence and respect that is necessary to work with soma and with psyche.
Yeah. I mean, because it's no less delicate or important than like going into a psychotherapist, a counselor, I mean, or like even Reiki. I mean, I talk about this even with like Reiki and energy healing when I have students. I'm like, you need to realize that when people come to you, they are coming to you in a vulnerable state and you need to respect them like so much because they are inviting you on their journey, right? They're trusting you on that journey. And so like when someone goes into any kind of therapy or therapeutic practice or whatever with a guide, a healer, a therapist, etc., like it's really important as professionals that we understand that. And as the person going in that you understand the importance of that. Like we talked about that with dreams.
Yeah.
Just last week, right? I think it was just last week. Or no, I don't know what I'm talking about. Weeks ago. Anyways, but in the last episode that you were on with me about that, we talked about how people often are like, oh, I had this crazy dream. And it's like, all of this stuff is a big deal. It's all of your lived experience and it matters. And so like,
it's sacred.
Respect yourself enough to make sure that when you walk into somebody's office or you take a course online or you read a book, that you realize you have the ability to say yes or no. This is or is not for me, or this doesn't feel right, or, whatever. Ask questions, all the questions.
Yeah, it's so important and necessary. And when we're starting to like tease apart what is somatics as we understand it, how we were trained, how professionals use it, and how it's kind of bandied about on social media, I compare it to, there's a lot of greenwashing out there where different organizations and companies are pretending that they're really environmentally friendly because they know that's what consumers want, but they're not actually changing any of their practices if you really do the research and look at them.
They just make all their labels green.
Yeah.
Put a planet on it.
There's a leaf on it. And so I liken that to how somatics is being used as a buzzword. And it's frankly, to me, body washing. Like it is not the same thing. And it really does require some educated discernment to tease that apart and to do the research to know what you're getting yourself into.
Right. So let's define somatics.
Okay.
Somatics, right? So I have a definition that I have used for years now, and it actually came to me in conversation with one of our previous professors, Dr. Elizabeth Nelson, because she was like, what would you say the difference between somatics or a somatic experience and a physiological experience is? And I was like, oh, let me think. Right. And then what I came up with, I was like, oh, that's good. I'm going to keep that. But basically, because I think somatic experiencing or not the practice, but experiencing things somatically and experiencing things physiologically get mixed up a lot. Right. Just like the unconscious and the subconscious mind. And the big difference is that our physiology is how our body is experiencing the world around us, how we're responding physiologically, heartbeat, breathing rate, all that kind of stuff to the world around us. And somatics is how we experience the world through our bodies. So that's the definition that I have kind of held on to. And I think for me explains it clearly. So physiology is how our body experiences the world. Somatics is how we experience the world through our bodies.
I love that nuanced distinction that you're making. And just to kind of add on to that definition, I see somatics as very much our lived experience, how we are experiencing the world, how the world is experiencing us through our bodies. Because honestly, we can't experience anything if we're not embodied. Like even for disassociation, you need to have a body in order to disassociate. Everything that we do, all of our experiences are coming through and being experienced through this soma, through the body that we are living in. And when we're talking about somatics, we're talking about intentionally making those lived experiences explicit.
Right.
So we're not just like going through an exercise routine and thinking that it's going to, like, if I do XYZ movements for long enough that it's going to heal all of my childhood trauma. With somatics, we're really intentionally exploring, but what is going on inside my system, in my body, when I am thinking about this experience or this emotion, and slowing down and getting really curious what is emerging, what's unfolding internally, and how can we come alongside and ally that experience of the body in order to allow for movement, for impulses to arise, for psychic space to open up. And rather than me deciding consciously what my body should do, based off of this experience that I had, allowing my body to lead the way of what is my body asking for next in this situation? What didn't get to happen that needed to? What happened too much that needed to be contained? What's the missing ingredient? And oftentimes we may try and logic our way out of a traumatic experience, but
or even just any experience,
yeah,
because
exactly.
our society is so often disconnected from our bodies.
And really, when we're in particularly those self-protective responses like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of those wonderful, necessary survival experiences, that doesn't go through our prefrontal cortex. That doesn't go through our logical decision-making mind. That goes through deeper areas of our brain, of our nervous system, that happen split second based off of what our nervous system perceives as our best chance of survival. So in order to take that bottom up, as we say, approach, we need to befriend what's going on in the body and kind of suspend that logical meaning making long enough for those innate intelligences to come forward.
Right. And so a few terms that you used, soma is Latin for body, which is where somatic comes from, right? And then psychic, we're not talking about like woo-woo psychic or intuition or anything like that. Psychic is psychology, psyche, psychic. So psychic energy is things that are happening with our psyche. And then also I just really want to put in like allowing, like a lot of the work with somatics is allowing the body to speak and allowing the body to be present. And as you were talking about it, I was thinking about some of these courses and stuff I've seen come up that are like somatic yoga, somatic, somatic breathing, right? And sometimes I read through the descriptions and I'm just like, somatics is not doing shit with your body. like that's not what that is. You can't be like, oh, this is somatic dancing because we're dancing and we have a soma and we're moving it. But if you're using intention, like you were talking about, if you're like authentic movement, for example, I would look at as a very somatic experience because it is an allowing, it is a listening, it is a paying attention to. And that is what I think really takes a lot of those experiences where you can add the term somatic to it. It's the intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add in curiosity is a really key piece of that, because it's not about being directive. Like when I'm working in my private practice with folks, I will say over and over and over again, everything that I offer is just that. It's an offering and it's an invitation. I'm not going to tell you this is what you have to do or this is what your body needs to do in order to move through this. My job is to ally your nervous system and come alongside and get curious with you about what your body is organically wanting to do to process whatever it is that we're working on in that session. And it's again, it's not like this do XYZ exercise routine and then all of your trauma responses will go away. Well, we also don't want your trauma responses to fully go away because you need them to survive. So there's a lot.
Right. Well, and it's like you said, it's the curiosity, the allowing, like we've already mentioned, being okay with the unknown.
Yes.
Right. And realizing that a lot of the work is about the process, not the answer. Right. Because it's just like, I think, I don't even know who I was talking to about recently, but I was like, it rewires your brain. We were talking about repeating a pattern, and doing something over and over. And I think that's like one of the most beautiful things about somatic work is that like you can create such significant change in your human experience by working with the body in this way without ever having to find the answer. Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not logical. It's not cognitive. We're working with the body.
And that's one of the big differences too between like traditional talk therapy, psychology, where it is what we would call a top-down approach, where we're working with what is already conscious, what is already explicit cognitively, and we're telling that story over and over and over again, and asking questions and interrogating it, and hoping to create change on a conscious level that will then trickle down into our body, into our behavior, into our life. It's a little bit trickle down economics. And what we do in somatics is really a bottom up process, or a meeting in the middle of that bottom up and top down process, where sometimes I work with folks in my somatic private practice, and I don't know the story or the narrative of whatever the experience or trauma that they are coming to me about, because we're staying with what's going on in their lived experience, in their body, in their nervous system, and allowing for that to unfold and process and integrate and create change on a bottom up level. So then we're shifting, literally, we're changing the neuroplasticity, we're changing the neural connections in the brain, the way that our nervous system is acting and connecting in a way that's changing not just the physiological process, but the psychological process as a result.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what you're impacting is, I don't want to throw this term out there before we get there, right? But really it changes our intercorporeality.
Yes.
It changes the way that we interact with the world around us through the lens of our body, right? So before we go into that, because I don't want to just start throwing terms, let's back up just a teeny bit and let's talk about like where somatics even came from.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So, similarly to what we were talking about in the dreams episode, so the core essence of somatics has been tended to and practiced in indigenous wisdom traditions through time immemorial. That is something that is really important to name and to foreground.
We're just labeling things and putting them in categories.
Yes, it's very much the kind of Western scholarly understanding of what has been known and experienced for thousands of years all over the world. The term somatics specifically was coined by Thomas Hanna in 1976. And he was a philosopher who was really interested in the lived experience of the body. And so he created the term somatics, as you said, based off of the Latin word soma. And so somatics has a lot of roots in philosophy with Thomas Hanna. Merleau-Ponty is a big philosopher who talks about body and lived experience and the embodied phenomenon. And Eugene Genlin is another philosopher who developed the process of focusing, which is very much rooted in a lot of the branches of somatics that are available today. However, the field of somatics and somatic studies was kind of slow to catch on. There was a lot of resistance, there still is, in mainstream psychology in particular, for incorporating the body into particularly psychological spaces.
So let me pause you for a second. Is that because, like in Jungian studies, it's so subjective? So it's hard to do objective-based research? Because I know that's where we struggle with depth psychology.
Yeah. When we're talking about the lived experience of the body, it is fundamentally qualitative, because it is so much about, I know what my lived experience is in my body, and I can ask you questions in order to solicit information and get a better understanding of your experience or another person's experience. but it is inherently subjective. Truly, 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 it's going to be different for every single person, which I think is another like interesting layer with how philosophical the roots of somatics is.
Right. Well, and I mean, like depth psychology is very philosophical as well, right?
Yeah.
And I would say even both probably border on spirituality and spiritual as well. And that's where like when mainstream psychology like has issues with this, it gets so frustrating because I'm like, how can you say the human experience isn't subjective?
Yeah.
Like it's my experience. Like you don't get to tell me what that is supposed to be like. Like it's just, I don't know, it like just blows my mind a little bit that we just accept that if it can't fall into this category or these many check boxes, then it doesn't count or it doesn't matter. And I also think that's probably why so many people struggle within that framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
So, somatics.
Somatics. Yes. Yeah, no, we could definitely fall down a rabbit hole about the values and limitations of qualitative and quantitative research. Another episode, perhaps.
A whole nother episode.
Yes. So somatics was.
I think we were talking about focusing and okay.
Yeah. So around this time, late 70s, 80s, there's pockets of conversation. You know, we talk about Marion Woodman was doing a lot of really incredible work foregrounding the body and the divine feminine in Jungian work. And authentic movement. There's so many pieces. Dance movement therapy really was taking off in the 80s. Mindfulness also, John Kabat-Zinn started to research quantitatively more of the mindfulness and create a foundation of understanding for that. And throughout the last 20 or so years, there's been kind of a rotation of popular buzzwords: mindfulness, holistic, somatics, that often are trying to point towards similar things of this lived experience, of this intersectional, interdisciplinary way that we experience the world. We're not just experiencing the world psychologically. We're not just experiencing it spiritually or emotionally. That all of these different aspects of who we are coming into play in how we are perceiving this present moment and showing up. So there's overlap between some of these different buzzwords and how they've been used and what they're trying to point to. But kind of going back to what we were saying earlier in this conversation, a lot of times the nuance of how the term is being used is taken out of context or not clearly defined. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk a little bit more about how we are defining somatics as part of that.
And I also just say that, like, if you're listening or watching this and you're interested in working with somebody that has a somatic practice or teaches a somatic class, like, feel free to ask them, like, what does somatic mean to you? And what about your class makes it somatic?
Yeah.
And if they can't answer that, red flag. But here's the other thing is, like, some people just have different definitions about stuff. It doesn't mean that their class isn't great. It doesn't mean that it's not right for you, but asking the question is important so that you make sure that you're like clear and you're on the same page.
Yeah. And ask people what's their lineage. You know, you do that with Reiki. It's a very important piece of like, where did you receive this information from? Who stewarded this information before you? And, you know, I have quite a few different tendrils of lineages that I have had the privilege of learning from and studying, that I'm weaving into my work. But if someone can't tell you where their understanding of somatics has come from, that would be another thing to get to sit with and question.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's one of those things where it's like, maybe that doesn't matter as much to you. Maybe it does. Everyone's a little bit different. Maybe you're like, I like this person's vibe no matter what. That's cool.
Yeah.
No judgment here.
Yeah.
But ask the questions, see what they come up with. You know, maybe they just read a bunch of books and decided to take those practices and put them into stuff they were already doing. There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But it's just important that you know, like, what you're getting into and what you're spending your money on, you know? Yeah. Just inform yourself.
Yeah. Inform
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay. Terms. You want to talk about a couple of terms?
Yeah. Build some shared language here.
This is where it gets a little fancy. So one of the things that, and we chatted about it briefly before the show, that I dealt with going into my dissertation research is I had to go into a lot of different fields of psychology because most of them don't talk to each other. And somatic psychology is still relatively newer compared to a lot of the other fields. And one thing I found is that a lot of them were saying the same things, but not using somatic terms.
Yeah.
Which was frustrating because I felt like a translator. So I just wanted to throw a couple of the like common somatic terms out there that I think the only reason they're not fully buzzwords is because they're long and some are hard to pronounce. So we're a little safe, but I have heard some. So anyway, the three that I use the most in my studies are, I'll list them and then we can talk about each one. Interoception, proprioception, and intercorporeality. Mm-hmm. Is there any others that you would want to throw on that list?
I think let's start with those three. So like, welcome to vocab with Dr. Cacky and Dr. Adrian.
Yeah, it's somatic vocab 101. Oh my gosh. So, and I'll also say too that I study somatics from a more group perspective, because that's where my research typically is in group and community, where I think most people study it from a more individual basis too.
Yeah, I think
so.
That's pretty fair.
Starting with interoception, my basic understanding is interoception is us being aware, becoming aware of our internal experience, right? Like intero, in our bodies.
Yes, I love that definition. And interoception it's our internal world. It's everything that's going on inside. You might be able to observe some things like different gestures, bodily movements, behavior patterns. But really, it's those sensations that we're feeling. It's the emotions that may be connected to those sensations, different images or memories that come up when we tune into different parts of our body. Intuition is also part of interoception. So yeah, all of anything to do with that inner world, that inner lived experience, that's interoception.
And also our physiology.
Yes.
Right? So this is like, I think one of the places where somatics and physiology kind of start to intertwine, which a lot of this kind of overlaps and intertwines. But like I mentioned earlier, like physiology, a physiological experience is how our body is experiencing the world. But when we take interoception, that's us becoming aware of the physiological reaction to the world around us, right? Yeah. So like if we're in a room that is hot and crowded, right? Psychologically, we might be like, ew, I don't like this, da, 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 da. But somatically, like interoceptively, we pay attention. We're noticing We're allowing our body to exist the way it is. And we're noticing like, oh, my stomach's a little upset, right? Maybe I'm perspiring. And that's an example of being interoceptively aware of a physiological response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, did I say that right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and just kind of playing with that a little bit more. It's listening to those whispers, or sometimes not so whispers, the messages that we're receiving from the body internally, and suspending judgment or meaning making long enough to allow the body to tell us what's going on, rather than being like, oh, that means I'm hungry. Well, maybe it does, but what you described, maybe it also means that you're nervous or excited, or there's so many different experiences that those sensations could be eliciting within you that require us to just slow down and get curious and listen.
And I think that is exactly where the somatic practice comes in, right? Especially because as we grow up, our parents tell us, our culture tells us what different feelings in our body means, right? Oh, you're just nervous, or you're just cold, or you're fine, you'll get over it, or whatever. Like, yeah, you're sad right now, or, of course your chest hurts because of this. Like, and so as we get older, we can take a somatic practice, interoception, paying attention, the focusing, the allowing, the being curious, instead of labeling, defining, and calling it done. And I will also say, as a veteran, this is one of the areas for me I had to do a lot of growth in, because, well, and I still do. I'm not gonna lie. But there are so many times in my life that like I've experienced physical pain for one reason or another. Not all military. I mean, I've also thrown myself off mountains and done all kinds of crazy shit, right? But you often end up in situations where you have to keep going.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily dissociation, because I'm aware, like my arm hurts, or my shoulder hurts. But I'm not going to pay attention. I'm not going to let it take the focus, because I have to be here and now. And I think when you do that too many times or for too long, you can stop listening to the body. So when people say like, oh, are you in any pain right now? You're like I was just at the VA. I went to the doctor the other day. I love the VA because civilian doctors are like, are you experiencing any pain? And I'm like, well, yeah, like I have daily chronic pain. And they're just like, oh my God. The VA, are you experiencing pain? What's your level of pain today? So different, right? It's not a yes or no answer. They're making an assumption that you probably have some kind of level of pain. It invites you to actually listen to your body for a minute. So the question makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
And I can say a 3, and they often will be like, okay, is this something that concerns you? Or I usually go, oh, it's nothing new. And they're like, okay, and we move on. But it took a long time for me to learn to do that.
So they're not just asking you to quantify your pain. They're also asking you, what does that number mean to you?
Exactly.
And that's very somatic, of not assuming that everyone's 3 means the same thing, because it does not. It really does not.
And I think, I mean, this is something I've learned so much as I like work with a lot of veteran studies, is there's so much in dealing with veterans that informs like the rest of the world with like civilian care. Because like I said, my civilian doctor doesn't ask me those kinds of things. And veterans typically have a much higher pain tolerance because we're good at ignoring things. So a 3 to us compared to a normal person might be like a 6 or a 7, right? So asking about like, how is that going, or what does that mean for you? It's really
that affecting your daily life.
That's that subjective question. It's honoring the individual versus the system, right? The number.
Yeah, absolutely. And that information is coming from that interoceptive awareness. It's inviting you to tune into that, and to, like you said, take that moment and check what's going on with me in this moment.
Yeah. And also, so that's all physiology, right? And being interoceptively aware of our physiological responses. But then you also mentioned like intuition, gut feeling, right? That gut feeling.
That knowing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And paying attention to that as our body is responding, feeling like someone's watching us, right? The tingles or getting the goosebumps about something. That's all, again, paying attention to our somatic experience, our lived experience through our bodies. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Beautiful. Okay. We're ready for term number 2.
Yes, let's go.
Proprioception.
Okay.
So interoception is inside the body. Proprioception is outside, technically. It's basically where our body ends and the rest of the world begins, basically, but expand on it.
Yeah. So building on that, yes, it is very much about where is my body in space. And when I'm trying to explain proprioception, I'll often invite people to notice like their joints. Like, how do you know like that your upper arm connects to your lower arm? Through your elbow, and your elbow controls the relationship between those two parts of your body in space. And so like they do a test at a lot of medical settings where they'll ask you to shut your eyes and to reach out your arms and then touch your nose. They're checking your proprioception. They're checking if you are aware where your nose is in relationship to your fingertips.
Exactly. Right. Where is your body?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Where is your body? How do you know where you are in space in this moment? Like when you go to sit down in a chair, how do you know that that chair is behind you?
Right.
All of those relational pieces of you and other parts of your body and the world around you.
Yep. And so I've studied proprioception a lot with my research with the military, specifically extended proprioception, which in sports psychology they call extended oneness, right? So like looking at athletes and how, let's say, a tennis player or a hockey player, the racket or the stick becomes an extension of their body.
Yes.
As a skater, right? My skates on the bottoms of my feet, it's not my feet end and then there's skates. It's my feet now skate. Like at a certain point, your proprioception extends to whatever tool it is that you're using.
Yeah. Driving is a great example too. Like, how do you know where your car is so that you're not going to hit another car? If you have a small car or a big car, that becomes an extension of your proprioception.
Right. Absolutely. And what I found is that in groups, especially in groups of people who physically train together, our proprioception extends to include their bodies as well, which is just, I don't know. It's so cool. It's so interesting to me. And that changes the way that we interact with the world around us, just like it changes the way an athlete, behaves on a field. If we're used to being in a large family versus a small family, right? There's this extended oneness. And this is where it starts to overlap with our next term, intercorporeality. But knowing how big we are, for example, also contributes to how capable we are and how much space we take up, what we can do, right? And the limitations, we'll say, of our body.
Yeah. It really starts to get into the concept of agency and how do I know where I am and where we are in order to take an informed next step.
So I have to throw a little bit of humor in here. Okay, just a little bit. So I've been an athlete forever and ever. I play a lot of different sports. I'm one of those people who's just naturally athletically inclined. I can just pick stuff up.
Right? Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which is again why I have daily chronic pain. But anyways, so I was talking with somebody, the exercise you were just describing where like touching your nose, right?
Yeah.
So I think people who are naturally athletically inclined have a higher level of proprioception generally. Like we know where our body is in relation to other things. However, I always assumed like that would make you less clumsy because you know where your body is. But I am very clumsy. Like I run into door frames. Like I'm not gonna lie. it's a thing that happens.
So interesting.
I have many friends that like are just like, gosh, you have bruises like a lot. And I'm like, yeah, it hit stuff. It happens. I know. I think it's funny. I don't know if it's something else. I don't know if it's because like when my brain's engaged, I stop paying attention to where my body is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if it's environmental, where when you're on the field playing rugby or whatever it is, like your body has that innate cellular memory of like, oh, okay, we need to know where everyone is, where we are. And when you're walking around your house, you're just like
thinking about the groceries. Bam.
Yeah, you're not as in the moment, perhaps.
So basically, my cognitive processes are screwing with my proprioception. I think we just figured it out. Gosh, look at us being doctors and stuff. I can't even handle it. Okay. So let's move on to the last one. That was proprioception. And now intercorporeality, which is, I'm not even gonna lie, this is a word that I struggled with saying out loud for so long. This would be like
a mouthful.
Intercorporeality. And when I had to present on this in conferences, which I've done a few times now, I don't think I've ever been so nervous to say a word in front of like a few hundred people in my life, because it's a mouthful. But I just jinxed myself. Intercorporeality is all about our place in the world in relationship to others and community. So we had intero, which is inter, proprio, which is kind of external, right? And now intercorporeality, and corporeality is our corporeal sense, right?
Corporal meaning our body, our soma, our lived experience.
Yeah. And so intercorporeality is about bodies being intertwined or coming together.
Yeah, being in relationship.
Yeah.
And that is both with other bodies, other human bodies, animal bodies, but also the world around us.
Right.
And that includes nature, that includes society, cultural groups, all of those. There's a lot of layers to intercorporeality.
Yeah, we were talking about the example I gave at the talk I gave in Switzerland about my dogs in the kitchen.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, if anyone has large animals that like to lay on floors near their feet, or even small children, because I feel like they are very similar. They're always underhand or underfoot, right? And I always think it's funny, you can tell, and I'll even extend it into families. I'm Italian. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, right? And when we're all in a small kitchen, we don't really like bump and hit and smack each other. Like we kind of know where each other's bodies are because I want to say it's Hannah that talks about extended body schema. But like our body schema extends to include our family that we spend a lot of time with, or like in my case these days, my dogs, right? Like I know where they are even without physically, like visually looking at them, because we share intercorporeal space.
Yeah. And that also connects with polyvagal theory, which is that we have 3 branches of our nervous system, according to this theory. We have the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and we have the social engagement system, which is the extension of our nervous system that goes outside of our body and connects up with other nervous systems, that allows, without even talking or even necessarily being consciously aware or seeing. Like if you walk into a room, you know the energy of the room, you know the emotions that are present in the room. If you are walking down the street and like you just know someone's looking at you and you turn and there's a deer in the forest looking at you, that's part of that social engagement system and that intercorporeal reality.
Mm-hmm. And all of that is created and reinforced through patterns of behavior over time, over your lifetime. Mm-hmm. And so like families, it shows up really strongly, but like friends that have been friends for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And I talk about it a lot in my research with veterans because, you know, my research is all about leaving the military. Wow. And loss. And this is one of the big areas where belonging is huge at an unconscious level. Like we talk about, you know, belonging very consciously, like, oh, of course you would have sad or you would have these emotions, blah, blah, blah. But it's not just your mind that's struggling. It's your body. It's your central nervous system that's used to having these connections that are no longer there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really well said. And intercorporeality is the nexus of community. That is what community is founded on.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I just got goosebumps. Oh, look at me being interoceptive. Stop. No. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we're just about at time. I'm always surprised, but I'm not at the same time because these, you know, the talks, we just geek out so hard and it's so much fun. Yeah. But I feel like we've covered the basics of what we wanted to talk about. What is somatics, where it's gone astray, where it came from. Mm-hmm. I think those three terms are the biggest ones for me that show up that are important for people to understand. Mm-hmm. And we've mentioned some of the, you know, founding fathers, if we will, from the Western angle anyway.
Mm-hmm. And Marion Woodman, can't forget.
Oh gosh. Thank you so much because she's kind of my favorite. So just to talk about if you want to look into somatics from a traumatic perspective, looking at dealing with trauma, because usually that's how people move into this space, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, Peter Levine.
Yes.
His work, his books, absolutely amazing. Highly recommend. Pat Ogden.
Yes.
Was another great one. Kathy Kane is also fantastic. Yeah. Marion Woodman, she actually talks a lot about addiction as well, which I think people forget is such a somatic experience, and really important to look at from that perspective as well. Is there anyone else that you would throw on that list?
Eugene Genlin for focusing. Okay. We talked about Thomas Hanna and Merleau-Ponty. Yeah, I think those are
the big guys.
Some of the ones that I would maybe start off with.
There we go. Because it gets very complicated very quick. And I mean, we mentioned polyvagal theory, right? So here's the thing. Stephen Porges, love his work. His books are really, really hard to read. Even as an academic. Yeah. So one of my favorites, I didn't pull it from the shelf, but it's called Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve. And it's actually by a guy who is big in cranial sacral work. I've bought this book 3 times because I've given away 2 copies. Wow. But the book actually has like a lot of exercises. It goes through all the different cranial nerves and what each of them signify. And then I think the last half is all exercises related to mostly polyvagal stuff, which is fantastic.
That's awesome. Just quickly, 2 more folks I would add in. Tina Stromstead, who's one of our teachers.
Absolutely.
Yes. And she is phenomenal dance movement therapist, Jungian analyst, really brilliant in bringing Marion Woodman's work into everything she does.
Her work, so like I mentioned before, when I went to Pacifica, super left-brained, like the first time we did authentic movement, I was like, okay, you know, this is gonna work. Her work is what completely flipped me and helped me understand how important the body is as a reservoir for any kind of psychological or psychic work that you need to do. Like she was like the foundation of that. So yeah, Tina Stromstead is amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Tina's incredible. And I also want to add in Resmaa Menakem, who
just bought the book.
Yeah, he authored the book My Grandmother's Hands. Yes, incredible. And he is a somatic abolitionist and talks a lot about intergenerational trauma and racial trauma and how we can tune into healing our somatic experience in order to best be of service to social justice and societal transformation for collective healing, not just individual healing.
Right. Which is so important because often we do this stuff and it stops with us. Mm-hmm. But this is the kind of work that is so powerful and needs to be moved out into the world too. So yeah, I just bought that book and I am super stoked to read it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the two groups that we mentioned is META and the USABP. So USABP is the United States Association of Body Psychotherapy, and you can find lots of references and information there. And then META is International
Somatic Movement Therapist and Educator Association.
Perfect.
And both USABP and META, as well as Somatic Experiencing International, all have practitioner directories, which if you are looking for a practitioner, I would highly recommend checking out those 3 directories and seeing what you're looking for if you want to work in person, virtually, if you want to work with Feldenkrais versus somatic experiencing. Check out those directories. There's a ton of incredible information, and they do a really good job of vetting all of the practitioners that go into those directories.
Which is important because somatic workers, and I'll say somatic workers, I'm using air quotes for anyone listening on the podcast that isn't watching, they're not regulated like therapists.
Correct.
Just like coaches. So we mentioned earlier, doing your homework, asking questions, it's important because just like coaches, they're not regulated. They're not like therapists and counselors. So going to one of these organizations or these websites, doing the research, looking at resources, going through their listed people, can really, really help you find a practitioner that knows what they're doing and won't cause any kind of harm.
Yeah, because they all have very strict ethical standards that their practitioners have to meet and agree to practice by. So that's a very important piece of the just safety with Somatics. Because like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, it really demands reverence and respect.
It's the body.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap us up. Is there any one last thing that you would want to share with everybody?
My one last thing is that I really want to emphasize that you are the expert in your lived experience. Even though we're talking about like credentialing and making sure that the people that you're working with have done training and are doing their ethical piece. Right. I also want to foreground that your innate lived experience is so precious and valuable. And you're the one who knows your body best. No one else can know it better than you.
Yeah. And I'll just say, especially as a veteran and someone who was an athlete for a long time, listen to your body. It is not your enemy. Pain is not weakness leaving the body. Okay. All of these sensations matter. The body speaks to us. We just have to listen. And often when we're not listening is when it turns into screams, right? And that sucks. So practice your interoception. Pay attention to where you're putting your body and what it says to you. So yeah.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for having me back and for opening up the space for this conversation. And I love talking about somatics. So if folks want to continue this conversation in the comments or reach out, please, please, please do.
Yep. And I'll put Dr. Cacky's information with the post. And look for our episode in September as we talk all about somatic experiencing and what that is.
Yes.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us on the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast that live streams every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll join us again. Have a great week.